Hello and welcome to another Patreon tutorial video. Once again, we'll be continuing our mega tutorial series, and this will be part 4. So in the last part, we started the process of, coloring and the general organic kind of painting process. And for this month's video, we'll be continuing that and delving into a lot of, problems actually that you might face during that process. So let's take a look. So firstly, of course, we'll be covering the general painting process. I want to talk a bit about how I try to capture the form, figure out the perspective, and try and think about how to light the scene. So that is number 1. Number 2 is something that I feel is actually pretty tough, right? We also have to keep evaluating our composition. I think I've definitely mentioned this before, right? We kind of keep checking if it looks right, what things can we change. But also, I think a big component about of this isn't just small things like do we like tweak the pose a little bit. It could actually be things pretty big, right? For example, perhaps the entire setting is not exactly how we want it. We want to change the setting completely, right? That could be a very, very possible option. Because that just perhaps when we started, we thought it might be something good, but then it ended up as something like, it's not so great. So that is a big thing as well. Also as well, of course, right, we want to figure out if it can be improved because, the whole point is to make things, right, I imagine, as good as it can be. And that is the evaluation. And of course, after the evaluation, we have to actually make our changes, right? We have to apply and adapt these organic changes. When by organic, to be honest with you, I just mean kind of sloppy changes, right? Like something really smooth, something really quick and dirty to try and figure out if the alternative is superior, that kind of stuff. So that is the kind of set of objectives for today and highlights for what we're going to be trying to do in this session. So without further ado, let's hop right into where we left off. So this is where we left off last month. So we have our character standing in this kind of lift lobby, taking a sort of selfie initially from a mirror as I originally, planned. So this is where we left off, but now that I come back with fresh eyes, remember what we were just saying, right? We have to evaluate. So interestingly, we're going to point number 2 immediately, which might be something you'll be doing even right when you come back to a painting overnight. So right now, what I'm feeling that this painting could do better with, right? Let's just type it out. Make that a bit bigger. Okay, so number 1. What I think could be good would be more clarity. Excuse me, let's move that in. We'll change the font color later. So number 1, I feel like we need more clarity, right? Because if we look at it closely and with me explaining, you can figure out what's going on. But imagine you coming across this picture, like out of nowhere, right? It doesn't really make sense to you. It doesn't really kind of speak to you at all, I would say. So that is one of the things that I want to start fixing, right? I feel like we need more clarity. Oops. We need more clarity to make sure we can see what's going on, right? In terms of lighting and in terms of the pose itself. So, and then number 2, I would say is perhaps we could make the space feel a bit more expansive. I think that is a interesting thing as well, because right now the place is feeling a little bit cramped, which is something that I feel like could be, or which is feel like something that isn't too great for what I want. So something to keep in mind, right? So these are 2 things that I feel like I want the image to go in. So let's start off with these 2 objectives. So looking at our initial sketch here, right, what could be the problem? So right now, I would say the number 1 problem is that the character has a bit of an ambiguous pose, right? From a silhouette, we can see that she's holding something to her face, it could be anything at all. And then from the rest of the image, you can see like there's a hand on the ground, right? There's a hand on the ground. And, it evokes a bit of something, you know, special, something kind of out of the ordinary, which I think is really nice. But I feel like it lacks a bit of dynamic energy in it. It lacks a bit of clarity. So right now, let's see what I can do to try and fix it. So this is gonna be me really just going in and trying my best to see how this works out. So again, right, as I mentioned, I will try to accelerate things and keep it information dense, but in the end, I also want to show more of the organic process. So here we go. So firstly, I want to try painting things a bit organically and working off the layer itself. So right now we're going to be, as remember, right, we want to do things a bit more organically, so we don't want to bog ourselves down with like, okay, let me open a new layer, or let me, you know, have to do this or have to do that just to, you know, even start getting to the process of making the changes we want. So right now, let's jump straight into the organic part and just, you know, do stuff like this to kind of immediately get the things we want on canvas. So remember that we wanted things to be more expansive, right? So right now I'm kind of expanding the overhead space. I don't want it to be too cramped. And I want, and of course, I think that we could go even further than that and make it really expensive. So we'll do things organically. For example, now I'm looking at the orange lighting that's coming down from below, and I'm feeling that it could have a bigger impact on the scene. So one thing that I've also thought about is that should we, you know, keep sticking to the tower scene that, you know, is prior to this? And I've been thinking hard about it, and I think my answer to this is perhaps not for this particular piece, right? I'll give myself the freedom to kind of expand beyond what was initially planned, because I think that is a good way to really fully unlock the potential of a scene. So this is going to be how I'm approaching this particular piece. So do be aware, right? Just in case you're wondering, hey, you know, why are you doing this? Don't you need to stick to the original setting? So just to let you know, I felt like for the purposes of demonstration and to make things a bit more smooth and more generally applicable, right, I will give myself a bit more flexibility for this particular piece. So now I've done a bit of expanding on the back area. Things are looking a bit wider. So one of the other things that I don't want to be restricting me is the front, because these two walls are very straight in a sense that they're just there. They're very blocky. They're not really good for anything. They're good, right, in a specific context. Like if we just need that piece of information, the two walls are really, really good if we just want that piece of info, right? But right now, we don't just want that. We also need to show, how do I put it? We also need to make the scene more expensive, which kind of ranks above having these walls just there. Right, so now that we've expanded the scene actually by quite a bit, right, we still have kind of the lift lobby. Let me get rid of this orange lighting here. So this is also a process of figuring out what goes where. How do I move certain things? Can we get away with moving certain things more or certain things less? And yeah, that's just really the process of what I'm doing right now. And then re-looking at the image and thinking of how can we possibly change it. So as we take a look at this current state of the image, right, it achieves some of the objectives that we want, right, where the scene feels a bit more expanded, with a bit more space, you know, to work with. But the clarity thing is still a bit of an issue, right? Because after thinking about it, I kind of figured out that as novel, interesting as the idea of having the character take a selfie with a camera phone maybe, it's not quite exactly what we need for this scene. So what I will try to do right now is to actually adjust what she's doing. So this is going to be definitely a bit tougher, because remember how we planned the pose and all that to get to this point? Right. So again, once again, I always want to re-emphasize that, you know, when we're painting, we're problem solving. And right now there's a problem of the character not really being kind of, or the overall composition not being clear enough. So since I've also mentioned how we're going to, you know, break away from the set a little bit, we also have a bit more freedom with regards to changing the character's costume and equipment. So you know, let's just play around this for a bit and see where we go. Right now I'm adding a new layer because I'm making some additions that I'm not too sure of that work. So this could be interesting. So one of the most recognizable things, I guess you could say, is if someone is holding a sword, right? I think that something in the primate brain just tells you that it's really obvious when someone's holding a stick and coming at you, or something like that, right? So that's the thing we want to kind of make use of a little bit. And have the character like hold a sword instead and see how that works. Or have the character hold a sword outwards, perhaps. And this is kind of the stage where there's a lot of figuring out to do, right? I hope you can't hear the thunder in the background. There's a bit of a thunderstorm going on right now. And right now I'm just trying to find the right gesture for it. I think this is a decent spot to leave it at for the moment, right? And they want to adjust the silhouette for the characters, you know, neck and face. Right now is like a horrifically unrecognizable blob, which is fine, you know, because it's temporary. It's nothing that we'll be keeping for too long. You know, we'll be fine with it. Excuse me, messed up my hotkeys a little bit. So yeah, so again, a liquify tool here is really great because it basically allows us to make changes that we just want without having to, you know, mess around and, you know, have to deal with 200 brush strokes just to make a small change, right? It's really good for moving small things around or even moving big things around and changing the pose in general. So this is a pretty good move, right? Right now things are a bit clearer. We can see the characters holding a sword, you know, like her body language is more obvious. You know, in a sense, it is kind of more generic, and I think that is also a valid concern, right? Because sometimes you might be worried about, okay, so if I just draw everything like the most standard tropey stuff, will it be a bit too generic? And the answer is kind of, right? But here's the thing, I feel like even the best media, or rather, how do I put it? I think sometimes things can feel tropey because there's something that's just easily recognizable and relatable, right? Like if you have someone holding a sword, okay, it's a femme fatale type of situation, you know, it's very tropey, you know, but in a sense it works, right? So it's not so much a case of just because you had a femme fatale, you know, archetype or type of character, suddenly, you know, all your work is worthless and there's no point continuing because there's nothing unique, because there's so many different, you know, very outstanding, interesting media based on that concept. So I would say the important thing is really just to kind of find your own way to express it rather than worrying about it too much, right? And again, right, the idea of a sword is not fixed. We could change it later, we could alter it later, but for now, let's just keep it as it is. And as we adjust the pose, you know, we can flip the canvas as always. And I think the situation, if you look at this now, right? If you look at the pose, just for the pose itself now, it looks a bit more obvious as to what's going on, right? Because the character is clearly holding a sword. As let me merge the couple of layers, as compared to before, where we can't actually see much of what's going on, right? We can't actually see much of what's going on. Sure, she's kind of taking a photo, but you know, we're not really sure why she's doing that at first glance. So it's definitely weaker in terms of attracting interest, right? The old version. So as I look at this, also a couple of things that I also noticed is that, okay, perhaps the lighting in the scene is a bit weak. So how are we going to remedy this? Again, I don't exactly know. So that's the kind of thing that I also want to make it clear, right? I don't have the questions at the start when I start drawing. With like the recent sets and stuff, I have a bit more of an idea of what's going on because, you know, after all, we need to plan a lot, rather I need to plan a lot of it because you know, it's my responsibility in a sense to make it as good as it can be. So for now, let's get rid of this hand. I want to try and introduce it in some way or the other later on, but right now it just feels kind of clunky. It makes the composition feel very dead, right? Like it's just this hand here. So let's try to get rid of it for now and see where we can see what we can do with it. because it also kind of gets in the way, right? I want to preserve the form, but I don't want to, you know, disturb it too much, you know, and it's kind of it's a little bit annoying. So now we have the space behind the character opened up for us. Okay, sorry about the interruption. I think the edited video should be fine, but apparently my power just tripped from the thunderstorm. So uh, unfortunately, as I was scrambling to shut down the computer and then restart it again after resetting things, I actually forgot to record a small amount of stuff. So there is a bit of update from where we left off. So, you know, yeah, unfortunately, but generally we're still exactly where we were. So again, apologies for interruption. So right now, things are looking kind of bad, honestly, if you look at the situation, right? We have the character looking, I guess, readable in a sense, but otherwise the scene doesn't make sense at all, right? Which kind of happens when you make big changes and you do it kind of roughly. So I'm going to try something now to kind of put the character and the near background more in focus to see what we can do with it, right? So let's go. Right now I'm just going to get rid of these walls completely because they're just annoying. They're not really serving any purpose. And we see if you can bring the character kind of closer to the outside. I think that could be an interesting way to do things. And then we also want to redo this part of the neon signs outside, I think. And kind of figure out how we want to do this exactly. And the one other thing I actually wanted to try is to see if we can rotate the floor the character is on a little bit to create more of an interesting shape. Because having all these flat lines isn't good, right? It's really not nice. It's kind of boring. It's just honestly. So if I'm just seeing if we could try out certain things to change up the shapes. Again, right, I'm also paying attention to the upper right corner of the screen. As you can see, the navigator tab, which is a nice thumbnail. You could even make it a bit smaller, right, to make it more thumbnail-like. And one thing I actually wanted to do is to add a bit of strong lighting to the scene. But before that, I want to kind of fix up the orange light from below that is entering the image from outside. And then create this shadow, right, in the foreground to separate it out from the background. So the floor tiles, thanks to our kind of change, we're going to have something like this. Right? It's going to be rough, but I want to just visualize it quickly to see if it kind of works. Yeah, it kind of feels more organic, right? It's like the character is standing in a location where, you know, she's facing the camera head on, which is, I guess, not optimal in some sense. But however, at the very least, right, she's not standing flat on next to the building, right, as previously, which I feel really kind of make things super dead feeling. So let's see how we can continue working from here. As I mentioned, I wanted to add a strong light. So something super bright and maybe even a little bit bluish. Maybe. And then we can have it kind of spill into the building. This is experimental, right? As I mentioned, we'll try our best to solve problems here. And that might work. Let's see if we can alternate the lighting. If the floor goes one way, what if the lighting goes another way, right? That could create some more interesting shapes. Yeah, I think that works just fine. Interestingly enough, which is really, really nice. So if we could add some of these kind of like window divider type of things on the wall. I also want to see how those kind of work in this context. Right, remember the floor is kind of going this way, right? And then this is just a placeholder. So a light is coming in from the outside and presumably from above. So let's see, we might also want to hint some of it on the opposite wall as well to make things a bit darker and closer on outside. Apologies if sometimes I may seem like a bit rambly. It's because really I'm just talking to myself also a little bit and speaking out loud for you guys, so you can have an idea of what I'm thinking about as I'm drawing. I'm also constantly checking whether the solution works or not, right? Because there's a very high chance that this solution just doesn't work, and then we have to revert back and continue on from where we left off. So if we throw back in the big letters that we were using earlier, maybe just like a small pylon of it. As it's kind of like a close-up. Could that work? It feels like we're losing the silhouette a little bit, which isn't great, especially with the strong kind of lighting offered by the red stuff, right? So let me think about it. Another option that we can do is to kind of turn this area more red, which is interesting. Does that work exactly? I feel not really, right? Or if we could darken it a bit more, could it be more suitable that way? That feels a lot more subtle. I think that could be something that works. So let's try and stick with this setup for now and see if we can work it into something better. So the scene is actually feeling quite tough. And constantly narrating this is, of course, going to be slightly boring for you guys, but I hope you can see that. I hope that this is kind of like a demonstration of how frustrating and difficult the process can be at times. So for scale, perhaps I want to add a couple of, like, those aircon units. I think they're really good for scale because they are slightly detailed, but they are also simple enough that you can work with them quickly. Right, let's just paste a couple of them around to see how it works in terms of designing like a building facade. They actually work fine, I think. I think they also act as a good way to kind of anchor down the scale of things. And then we'll continue working on the character to kind of see if it helps bring the pose out a bit, or does it not work. So right now, I think my new challenge, because again, right, as we mentioned in the tutorial, in the text part, in the intro, there's actually a bunch of stuff that we need to consider, because as we keep changing it, we need to evaluate it again and again, right? So this is kind of the portion where we do that, and let's see if we can weaken or reduce the slant by a bit. That will bring the character a bit closer to the background, which could be helpful for this situation. I'm also starting to consider perhaps editing the character to include more of the indoor area, or rather, excuse me, editing the scene to show more detail indoors, right? Because right now it's very outdoor focused, and the indoor is really empty. So I'm trying to think of a way to see how I can spruce things up, per se. The character's pose is fine, I think, right now. Of course, there's things to be adjusted, but generally, I think it's not in a horrendous place. I think we can work with it. Minus, of course, silhouette issues like this, which can make things look very weird. Okay, so things are going decently well, although I'm still seeing a lot of trouble coming in. I still foresee a lot of trouble, unfortunately. And now I'm thinking about my next step, right? So what's next? Let's see if we can add a bit more orange lighting from below and how that works with the scene. And then we can have it cast shadow upwards, because this is like a night scene, right? We can have it cast shadow upwards. Have a brighter orange to add a bit more form. Yeah, I think one thing it does nicely is to add a bit more energy to the cityscape. But I feel like the big ornamental letters are getting a bit in the way. So let's try to work without them for now. So again, right, again, this is all part of the process, and I think this is kind of what this episode is going to really be. Because I feel like, especially when I don't have a very complete setup, when I'm being a bit more experimental, I tend to wander through the process and see what I can do with what I have. So right now we have kind of a cityscape and a character, which is nice. I'm thinking how we could introduce more lighting to the scene. Let me think. Now bear with me, I'm going to try out restoring the original flatter look to the scene. Just for a moment. And have it something like this. So the character is right behind it. And then we have like shadows being cast upwards. I think that is something nice and dramatic that we can try. With shadow being cast upwards by the orange light from the city below. I think that's a nice bit of imagery or shape language that we can try and work with. So once again, this is my organic process as to how I approach the whole painting thing. And this is really part of my general painting process. For scenes which are more, how to put it, more contained in a way, you know, I don't necessarily go through all these, you know, more complicated steps. I kind of am able to get away with something easier. But for situations like this, where I'm really freestyling on what we're working with, I feel like I can definitely spend a bit more time just wondering what to do myself. And the sword is looking a little bit too big, so we need to tone that down. And the character's silhouette is unfortunately looking a little bit weak. Wonder if we can work out something with the floor. Okay, this is interesting. So right now what I've noticed is that the character's silhouette is kind of acting against us, right? Because we have the sword, which is telling a nice story, but the dress itself doesn't seem to exactly work for the setting. So let me try something different, right? What if we extend the dress to something like this? And then have it, and then try it again. I feel like it makes the silhouette a bit simpler and asymmetrical in a nice way. Right, if we hide one leg and we have one leg more forward, I feel like it adds like a nice touch to the pose in general. So I think this is a good change, although there's still a lot to be modified, right, regarding the lighting from outside. So that's still something I'm stuck on and figuring out. So maybe now actually I'm thinking, let's see if we can kind of shrink the character down a bit and make the scene a bit more inclusive of different elements. I think that could be that could be something worthwhile to try. So let's duplicate the layer, shrink down things a little bit. And to kind of reintroduce the slight angle as well, because I think that worked well. Returning to the kind of dead angle is not great, so we definitely want to try out that slanted angle again to see how it works. Again, right, apologies for being a bit more silent. I'm also thinking quite hard on how best to proceed with this scene. So one thing I definitely want to do is to start filling in the indoors, at least suggest some of what may be going on. Perhaps a banquet of sorts that has gone wrong and like all the stuff is spilled everywhere. That could be a good way to try out things. And then let's see if we can get rid of the red on the floor. I think that's a nice difference if we get rid of the red on the floor. And then we have like victims of her rampage, right? So just the classic poor extras who are knocked out on the floor, just for starters. And then we also want to go back to the background, right? Because right now I'm feeling the silhouette is a bit weak. So let's see if I can have her stand in front of something interesting, like a billboard or something that isn't like a very strong light source on its own, because I don't want it to compete with our bright white light source. So let's see how that works. Again, as you can see now, what I'm really doing is to kind of enhance the impression the background gives and get it closer to what I want. But it can be difficult as well, right? Perhaps for this particular billboard, we don't need it to be so orange. Or perhaps we can have it be bluish. That's what I'm kind of thinking of, but it feels like it doesn't quite work as well as I would want it to. So let's scrap that for the moment. Let's just jump back in history. That tool is very helpful as always. Accidentally switch my brush. So let's keep going. And right now you can see me making all sorts of these kind of small strokes here. All this is doing is to help me hold some textures and add a bit of texture so I can look at the background as if it's like a real, setting, right? Because right now if I just have an empty blank wall in the back, it doesn't really make much sense. It looks a bit too empty. And yeah, so that's kind of why I'm doing this. But again, right, it's tough because you eventually have to start working in details. Otherwise, you can't work with this background permanently. It doesn't really work that way. But, as they say, you gotta keep experimenting to find what works. So for the character, I'm kind of satisfied, at least more pleased with her pose than before, because we're now able to make clear to the viewer what she's doing. She's holding a sword, right? Like that messaging is really clear. So that's very, very good for us. And one thing I actually want to try is to give her perhaps a scimitar, because I believe I drew her with a scimitar before. So that could be like a nice deviation from like the katana, which is quite frankly sometimes we notice it being used really overused a lot. Not to say that anyone should stop using it, but it's just kind of the impression you get. I'm sure you also feel a little bit of it as well, because it's a weapon with a really pretty design. Why not use it more in your art and so on and so forth. So I also noticed that having the lighting do this is a good way of making things a bit more dynamic. But I also want to try the reverse, right? Let's see if we can reverse this without doing too much hard work. Again, being lazy. And if we reverse it this way, unfortunately our scimitar has reversed as well, so let's exclude that. And see how this reversal works. So I think this works much better because our character's line kind of goes this way, right? Our character kind of goes this way, and then we have the lighting go this way, and then we have the outside edge go this way. So it's 3 alternating edges, which I think adds a lot more interesting flow than before, where it's kind of like these two are aligned, and then this is odd, right? I think this one is better because we have an alternating Z pattern, which I think is super nice. 1, 2, 3, right? Maybe we can even have 4 this way. We have something leading this way in the foreground. So that's nice. Glad to see that something is finally working out in my favor. Well, anyway, let's keep going. As you can see, I'm constantly stamping visible. What this does is give me a full kind of complete platform to work off of. Like I can just grab things and move them around. I don't have to worry about too much about anything else. And yeah, so now that we're a bit more into the thing, let's create a couple of windows. How should I do this? Okay. So let's create the white border. And then duplicate these a bit. Maybe even do this, cut a line across. Add a few random lines here and there to kind of maybe indicate like a half open window or stuff like that. So that's another element that we can duplicate and play with around. So let me copy and paste it. Now you see I can save it as a separate layer because I might be able to use it more than once. So let's just have fun throwing these around all over the place. So this is a good part of having a city that is very disorganized. You can have fun doing all this kind of stuff that normally wouldn't really be an option, right? So things are starting to come to life a bit. We have a city that in the background that's kind of interesting to look at. We have the foreground, which is, you know, as we mentioned, finally I realized that, you know, composition also has this kind of neat tricks. And sometimes it's just kind of like a try it as you go along, right? Because if I didn't think to make the reverse, you know, dealing with the scimitar and all that, we wouldn't have this state. So that's an interesting thing that, you know, I really reminded myself of as I was creating this video. And now that things are moving along a lot more smoothly, I'm kind of like, I'm more relieved, to be honest. I'm quite relieved of how things have gone. Because I was like, okay, so I really don't know if this video is even going to work out. What if things just go nowhere? You know, that's going to be terrible. And really, fortunately, it seems that things have worked out a little bit better than I expected. So yeah, I'm really relieved. Let's just continue. Now that we are having a good we have a good amount of momentum, it's nice to continue. And then you can think about structural things in the wall, like maybe we have we want to show a bit of perspective in the wall as well. So maybe we can have like a bit of shadow here, and then like a bit of bright area here. Oops, I overrode it on this layer. So let's backtrack a little bit and then redo it. Maybe have this part of the place bulge out a bit, give it a bit of extra form. Like these places have a bit of awning, and then we give it like a bit of daylight, right? Not quite daylight, right? But from the sky, a little bit of moonlight, I think is a good way to say it. I don't know why it took me so long to get to that. But yeah, things are moving along nicely. We have kind of a city set up in the background, you know. It's a great canvas for us to add more stuff to it. And our character is in a more interesting pose that is recognizable. Of course, right, we broke away from what we started at. But, you know, I think that's totally fine. Because for the purposes of this, I really want to demonstrate the importance of evaluating your own composition constantly, right? Initially, we had the elevator scene, which is fine. But, you know, it didn't really strike a chord with me. So I wanted to change it. And then we wanted to make the changes organic, right? Which, as you can see here, I did not go back and resketch the whole thing. I made changes on the fly, making use of tools like liquefy, warp, transform, flipping horizontal. All these stuff are great stuff in digital art. They can help you make these changes really quickly and really efficiently, right? Which is why we're able to spend a bit of time to figure things out without, you know, without having to strain ourselves too hard, and then we can figure out quite a lot of stuff. And then once we apply the changes, it's going to give us a nice effect. Right, and remember our floor tiles. That's another nice alternating thing that we can throw in. Right now, I'm not going to really draw them in really carefully because this is just a sketch phase. I don't want to make it too involved. But yeah, it'll look something like this, right? So it's going to give us a good bit of perspective as well. So maybe we can throw in a bit of noise in here. And yeah. So let's see. And then we can reintroduce the glass. Temporarily, of course, because I just want to see what it looks like with the glass. Pretty good, if I may say so myself. And then we have the light here and the light and the shadow here, right? Because you think about it, even if it's like a break in a glass wall, you kind of still have a little bit of shadow cast by it. So this is kind of a good way to show the shadow. Okay. So I think things are working out pretty well. Of course, there's still plenty of room. There's still plenty to go, right? Maybe I might even want to work on the back wall a bit more, give it like also another treatment, right? Because if I recall, again, this is like the 5th time I'm mentioning this, but remember how we were doing this, and then maybe something this. What I was thinking is, because we went this way, maybe you can have the background kind of go this way. So this side is nearer to us than this side, and then we have like this nice taper off. That could be interesting. That could be worth exploring, right? Maybe we might even leave a bit of gap here, and then we can have something here in the off in the distance that gives us some interesting stuff to work with as well. So that's a lot of stuff that I still want to continue figuring out. But for now, I just want to kind of reconsolidate my gains. And okay, here's another tip that I think might be helpful. Sometimes I like to jump backwards a lot by doing this. And the purpose of this is just to kind of help me check if I accidentally made any changes that I didn't want to, right? So right now things are looking pretty good, and I'm pretty happy with the state of things. So at this point in time, I think it's fine to slow down a little bit. I've been trying to keep things really, really fast so as to keep things flowing, and I must say it's been working out well enough, but I think also need to slow down a little bit. If you're painting along, or if you're, trying to follow the same pace, do not worry about that at all, right? Because there's so many times where I do what you see, what I'm doing, and then later on I just undo the whole thing because I just feel like it still doesn't work. And I do something else, and then it takes really, really long. So don't worry about time or your pacing, because that is really just part of the learning process. You're eventually going to get faster. You're eventually going to become more efficient at it. So don't worry about those parts too much, and just enjoy the process. And really just think about why I'm doing certain things, rather than how exactly I'm doing it or how exactly you need to follow it. So now we're in a space where there's a bit of empty space above. I want to explore the option of using it, because there's a chance that the composition is decent without it as well. And so yeah, this is another consideration, right? As I'm seeing the composition evolve, I'm seeing it change, I'm seeing more opportunities arise. I'm enjoying the process of seeing how I can edit things to make them flow better. So let's see if we temporarily restore the windows again to see how those work. Maybe we need to introduce a little bit of a small border here, because generally in like establishments, you don't have the glass window really just stuck right at the window. You have like this little small border area to kind of demarcate things. I think that works pretty well. I think it adds a bit of a realistic touch that I feel is necessary to a scene like this, right? Because if it feels too far disconnected from reality, it doesn't feel too good. Also, another thing I think might be worth adding is maybe like a fallen over chair. Just as a very, 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 very rough sketch, right? Maybe you can have it like this. Maybe you can have it like this. Something very, very rough. So I think right now it's looking, the effect is looking, apologies if my volume is getting a bit softer once in a while, because I'm like leaning back to look at the scene and not really focusing on the mic, starting to drift away a little bit. So what if I give the character a bit more of a top-down line, right? Because let's say this environment she is in is pretty expensive, as we were mentioning. If the environment is expensive, then it's likely that, she receives light from above. Or rather, there's more space from above, right? Because the more space there is from above, generally speaking, let's say you're closer to the ground than you are to the ceiling, right? Which is in most situations. And if it's in situations where that's especially true, like you're in a great hall, you're going to generally see that the light from above is going to be greater than the light from below. So that's kind of how, just by doing this, you can give a gauge to your audience on how high the ceiling is. I think we can also add a little bit of that to the areas inside. So far, these are just like random doodads that are littered in, that don't mean too much. So right now, I think the general layout I'm not unhappy with, but some of the things I feel like I still want to think about. So I took a really short break to kind of just look at a picture and think about what I needed next. So I don't just stare at the screen blankly and nothing moves for like 5 minutes. But I didn't paint anything different, right? But I would like to reverse this step. So this is why I put it on a different layer, right? I'm not really sure if I wanted to do the interior exactly like this. So let me reverse this step to this setup where I feel like things are in a place that I like. And the one thing I wanted to try is to adjust the background. So we have this background here with all its lines, the horizontal lines. And then let's do this. So let me transform and distort. Remember how we're going to follow the, or alternate the presentation of the angles a bit. So we have this side is a bit nearer and this side is a bit further. So we're kind of going to try out this effect and see if it works. And then what I do after I do that is I can kind of copy it and re-paste it on as a separate layer, right? So I can work with it like this. So I think, generally speaking, the effect works well. It creates yet another layer of depth to the illustration. But one issue I do believe has appeared is how this light is coming in seemingly from the left side, right? So this is kind of, because this part being in shadow kind of implies that there's a wall blocking it. So having the apartment block slant that way, it feels a little bit wrong, I would say. So it's something that requires some reconsideration, right? So if we return it to a flat position, I feel like it's more suitable, I would say, right? Because right now, as compared to this, it feels like the right side is more likely to be cramped, because by doing this, right, we're opening up the left side of the image. Excuse me, I meant the left side. We're opening up the left side of the image to be very empty. So it's kind of weird that, because the light is coming in from this angle, why doesn't the background receive light as well? So this is kind of weird, right? So this is kind of like a physics reason as to why we shouldn't make this change. So that's interesting, right? So what if we go back to where we pasted it before we free transformed it and then did this? If we make the top smaller than the bottom, could that be a good way to do things? Let me try that out as well. And I think it's not too great, because at our sort of this long angle lens, right, we're not capturing stuff that is very far out. Or excuse me, I think we're not capturing things in a sense from a steep angle, so it's a bit weird for us to just throw down this angle, right? We're not looking at the character from top down very much. So those are two transformations that I tried and gave up on. Let's try the third one, which is to bring us a lot closer to the action. So this one could be a bit tough to pull off. Let's see how I want to do it. What if we expand like a set of windows to be bigger and a set of air conditioners to be bigger. And then kind of move them around the place to see how it works. I think this one has a bit of potential. It makes the opposite block feel a bit closer, which is nice for us to add in a bit of detail. We can add in a bit of life to the place. And then if we throw down a perspective grid over here, let's see how it goes. Give it a moment to load. I'm gonna rasterize it because I don't need the pen tool anymore. Give it a color. Okay, so let's use this grid to help us draw a couple more things, right? Because now that we have the background a bit closer to us, we can also play around with things like that just to see how it fits, and then it feels more intimate, right? I think that's a good way to put it. It makes the block behind us feel a bit more intimate, and it gives us a sense that we're not just like a floating building in like a huge like space city like in Star Wars, but rather, you know, the buildings are kind of cramped, they're kind of close to each other, things are, you know, kind of messy and all that. So that's the kind of impression I wanted to create, and I think this is doing it for me, finally. Yeah, I think this looks good. So, using the perspective grid, as we just put down, what I think we could do is to have something like a banner, or not a banner, right? Like you see in Hong Kong, there's a lot of these kind of street signs that kind of stretch across the road. I think that those could be nice to have here. Right, and then we can adjust the size if we feel it's a little bit too big, and shrink it down a bit. And then have the light hit it from below. Right, and have the light hit various things from below. I feel maybe we can try a bit more of that. Make the orange feel a bit more present in the top areas of the illustration. And then, you know, they have clothing poles and all that, so we can try that as well, extending out clothing poles. And it feels like a more intimate scene, I think, which is what's nice. So we can now toss in a few more billboards. I think I want to give this place a bit of a commercial feel to it. Because, of course, when we are drawing things very roughly, right, the impression that we get from it can vary a lot, which is not always a good thing. Because it may accidentally come across as a place that's like way too spooky, for example, which is not what we want. Or it's not exactly what we want in certain ways, or this way or the other, and then things don't work out for us. So, you know, we want to keep trying out new ways to do things, so that we keep our illustration on track. And then we can keep creating more of these to sort of brighten up the space, or rather fill in the space. So I'm trying to figure out how next we should approach this. I think one thing would be nice to be finding a way to add a bit more depth to the scene. So perhaps we could try giving the area like a slice of the outside. Let's see where we can go with this concept. Let's try it by making the top a bit brighter to almost demarcate like a roof area. I think that's nice, right? Because it's one thing to have a roof on a building, and it's another thing to not have a roof on the building. So it's kind of like a big jump from just having, you know, various stuff on building versus opening up a space above it, so we can see more into the background as well. So the background is a bit too bright, so let's try having it a bit darker for a change. Once again, a lot of this is experimental. I don't know how this is going to work out. Maybe this is going to look horrendous. I'm not too sure what I think about it. What if we fill it with orange instead? That seems to layer up the image kind of nicely almost. But we want to tone it down a bit so we don't get too excessive. I feel like it doesn't quite work. So let us, once again, take a couple of steps back. And yeah, this is, again, I feel like I'm almost just talking out loud and not really, as I mentioned, right, doing a mega tutorial. But again, once again, this is like a realistic look into how the process is for me and how I usually try and build my drawings, you know, accordingly. So what I think we can try to do now is to add a couple of billboards here and there, perhaps. It feels like I feel like I'm missing something almost, but I'm not sure what. Usually I try to get a feel of the image that I'm drawing, like say, does it feel like we're going where I want it to go, or does it feel like it's not quite heading there in the right direction? What if we mix two colors in close proximity together? Does that work? Or if we have a different color on the billboard, does that work? So yeah, this is my thinking process, and yeah, I feel like it can get pretty tough sometimes. So thank you for bearing with me for this episode. And I thought hopefully this is kind of insightful and helpful, right? As I always hope that these videos are, because I feel like sometimes it's a bit pointless to just keep showing like a really standard stuff that you can see anywhere else. I want to try and add a bit more value and kind of show things that are a bit more interesting. So what I do want to try now is to give the background buildings a different look, because the lack of windows, right, I just kind of realized is making this place look more like a prison block than I intended. So let's see if we can try and solve that problem a little bit. Get rid of this prison block look. And up the number of windows that we have around. Maybe completing a row could be nice. I think another issue I think is kind of surfacing right now is that by having so many window blocks, excuse me, or using our very rough texture so much, it feels like it's starting to feel kind of a bit out of place, right? Because of how rough it is. So once again, another issue that you can face when using placeholder stuff, sometimes you outgrow them and then they don't look very good. So another thing to watch out for. Okay, so here's one thing I actually thought might be worth exploring, right? So if we don't want to, let's say, throw in a really strong light directly, like could try now actually. Let's say we have this in the background, right? It feels a little bit wrong. It doesn't feel quite right. But what if we have it in like the reflection of the... We have it in the reflection of the background building, right? Will that work better? I think in a way it does. But I feel like the background itself still doesn't look quite good enough. So let us backtrack once again. So this has really gotten me thinking, right? How do I kind of set this up to be more interesting? How do I set this up to be better? So, you know, it's a bit of a tough process. And I want to keep thinking about what I'm lacking, right? Maybe I'm moving these windows a bit too close. So let's try shrinking them down a little bit. Or maybe that the lack of top light is making this place feel a bit too dark. So maybe let's throw in a selected color, neutral. Let's wind it back a bit. Give it a bit of top light. Does that work? I think it works a little bit. It kind of opens up the exterior a little bit. But I still don't quite get what I'm missing. So again, right, this is the part where things might start getting tedious, right? Because I'm just trying to figure out, is it because I don't have enough of these signs that are protruding out from the wall to give it more depth? Or is it something else, right? Could I even make these neon? Will it help if I make them neon? Right, if they're just white, maybe they're a bit too boring. Maybe I need to give them a variation of colors. Maybe you can have a gold and black one above here. Maybe that will help. Or maybe this is the time, right, where I go and look at some references. For example, look at Hong Kong Street or Hong Kong Street references, Kowloon Street references, to kind of get a good handle on how I might want to approach the density, right? What is the density that I'm looking for? How do I get there? These things might start becoming helpful right about now. And actually, this video has been going on for almost an hour, or maybe we've already crossed the hour mark. I forgot to start my stopwatch today, so very unfortunately, I think we're out of time for today, but I think today is a pretty fruitful episode. We've gone through actually quite a lot of changes for this picture. We have also went through really a bunch of stuff that I feel is quite meaningful to share. And yeah, I think we ended up with something a bit more interesting than what we started with, right? Because we started, let's go back. Never mind, I think I still have the earlier layers. We started somewhere here, right? We started somewhere here, which is, you know, but we ended up somewhere here, which I feel is more interesting than where we started. And it's also in a direction where I want to go and explore more. So yeah, so for today, we'll leave it here. Thank you so much for watching. And we'll continue this mega tutorial episode next month, where I keep trying to figure out how I can make this image better, right? Maybe billboards with more texture and all that kind of stuff. So one of the things I was most worried about was that this will be so boring, but fortunately it has been really scary for me because I'm constantly afraid that I might just get stuck. But I think it has become a pretty high octane episode where we make a lot of changes and a bunch of stuff happen, and hopefully this is something that will be helpful to you as well, right, as you draw your own stuff. And yeah, once again, thank you again for all your support here on Patreon, and remember to catch this episode on next month, where I'll be continuing this. So once again, thank you and bye bye.